Every year, 4 million tourists pour into Carcassonne. Another 2 million squeeze through the gates of Rothenburg. Dubrovnik gets so packed in summer, the mayor had to cap the number of people allowed inside the walls. But here is what nobody tells you. These are not the real surviving medieval towns. These are the ones tourism found first. Across Europe, there are walled cities where real families still hang laundry from 800-year-old towers, where the baker still opens at 5 a.m. behind ramparts from 1219, where the kids still play football in squares that held sieges. You have never heard of most of them. Today we are going to 9 forgotten European towns where people still live inside medieval walls. And by the end you will understand why these towns survived when thousands of others were torn down. Let us start with the smallest one. Number 1. Monteriggioni, Tuscany. This is the town Dante wrote about. In the Divine Comedy, he describes the giants of hell standing like the towers of Monteriggioni, and he was not exaggerating. The walls were built by the city of Siena between 1213 and 1219 on top of a perfectly round hill as a forward fortress against the Florentines. They run about 1,870 feet, 570 metres, around the summit, with 14 square towers and 2 gates. From the top of the wall, a watchman could see the old Roman road south to Siena for more than 9 miles, 15 kilometres. Walk through either gate today and you will find a village of roughly 50 people, 2 restaurants, 2 bars, a hotel, a few shops, 1 small Romanesque church. That is the entire town. The walls held for over 300 years of active siege warfare and were never once breached by force. Florentine armies camped outside them multiple times between 1244 and 1554 and failed to take the hill. Monteriggioni fell exactly once, in 1554, and it fell from the inside when a captain named Giovannino Zeti, an exiled Florentine in Sienese service, handed the keys to the Marquis of Marignano in exchange for the return of his confiscated properties. The engineering was never the problem. 50 people still wake up inside those towers every morning, 800 years after the first course of masonry was laid. Number 2. Óbidos, Portugal. If Monteriggioni is a fortress, Óbidos is a royal gift. The walls wrap around roughly a mile, about 1.5 kilometres, of whitewashed houses with bright blue and yellow trim, a castle at the northern end, and a population of around 2,000 people. The town was taken back from the Moors in 1148 by Afonso Henriques, the first king of Portugal, and in 1282 King Dinis gave Óbidos to his wife Queen Isabel as a wedding present. That started a tradition. For the next 5.5 centuries, until the royal grant system was dissolved in 1834, Portuguese kings gave Óbidos to their queens on the wedding day, which is why it is still called Vila das Rainhas, the town of queens. Each queen actually owned the town. The rents, the taxes, the produce all went directly to her private household. It was not a symbol, it was a revenue stream. The walls you walk today are mostly 13th century, with 14th century extensions, about 43 feet high, 13 metres in places, and you can walk almost the entire perimeter on top of them. The blue and yellow trim on the houses is preserved by local ordinance. Blue was believed to ward off evil, yellow marked municipal buildings. The walls were damaged by the Lisbon earthquake in 1755 and then patiently restored over the early 20th century. Inside, families still live in the same white houses. The traditional cherry liquor called ginginha is still made by hand in the same shops and served in small cups made from dark chocolate. And once a year, in July, the entire town turns itself into a working medieval market with blacksmiths, jugglers, and residents in period dress. They are not performing, they live there. Number 3. Visby on the island of Gotland, Sweden. This is where the Battle of Visby happened in 1361. A Danish army under Valdemar Atterdag landed on the west coast in July. The farmers and yeomen of Gotland, many of them boys and old men, were slaughtered outside the walls on July 27th. The council inside the city opened the gates 2 days later. Between 1905 and 1928, archaeologists found 3 mass graves just outside the walls and pulled out more than 1,100 skeletons, many still wearing their armour because the Danes stripped the rich dead but left the common soldiers in whatever metal they could not sell. Almost a third of those dead were minors or elderly. About 450 of the wounds were from swords and axes. Another 120 were from arrows and spears. Those skeletons remain one of the largest archaeological windows we have into medieval warfare anywhere in Europe. The walls they died in front of still stand. They are about 2.1 miles long, 3.4 kilometres, built in 2 stages during the 1200s and 1300s, with 27 of the original towers still intact. They are the best preserved medieval city walls in all of Scandinavia. Today, roughly 23,000 people live inside or just beyond them. The city was added to the UNESCO World Heritage List in 1995, not as a preserved ruin, but as a living Hanseatic town where the streets are still the same, the warehouses still have their original names, and children walk to school past fortification towers from 1288. The wall was attacked once in 1361. It has not been attacked since. Number 4. Mdina, Malta. They call it the Silent City. Mdina sits at the highest point in the centre of Malta, a fortified hilltop that has been a fortress for at least 2,700 years. The Phoenicians built the first walls around 700 BC. The Arabs rebuilt and expanded them after 870 AD, adding a wide moat that still separates the city from its suburb, Rabat. The Normans rebuilt them again after 1091, and today roughly 250 people live inside the walls, making it one of the smallest inhabited walled cities in Europe. Cars are banned. Only residents on foot, a handful of emergency vehicles, the occasional horse carriage, and a few delivery bikes are allowed through the main gate. At night, when the tourists leave, the city goes completely silent, which is where the nickname comes from. You can stand in the main square after dark and hear nothing but your own footsteps on stone that was laid 900 years ago. Aristocratic Maltese families still live in the same palaces their ancestors owned in the 1500s. The Palazzo Falzon has been occupied by the Falzon family since the medieval period, with part of its ground floor now a house museum while the family continues to use the upper floors. About 1.5 million tourists visit each year, and almost none of them realise there are still working households behind those Baroque doors. The convent school still holds classes. The cathedral still holds Mass 3 times a day. Residents still walk home through a gate the Knights of St. John reinforced in the 1530s against the Ottoman fleet that would arrive 3 decades later in the Great Siege of 1565. Number 5. Nördlingen in Bavaria, Germany. This is one of only 3 German towns with a fully intact medieval wall, along with Rothenburg and Dinkelsbühl. Nördlingen is the one nobody talks about, which is strange because it is also the only one built inside a meteor crater roughly 15 million years old. The Nördlinger Ries is a circular depression about 15 miles across, 24 kilometres, caused by a meteorite strike in the Middle Miocene that hit the ground at an estimated 43,000 miles per hour, 70,000 kilometres per hour. The local stone, called Suevite, was formed from Mesozoic sediment compressed by the impact shockwave. It contains microscopic diamonds, each less than 1/100 of an inch across, 0.2 millimetres, created when the meteor struck a buried graphite deposit. The total estimated diamond content in the stone is around 72,000 tons. Most of the church's houses and fortifications in town are built from it. The town wall itself was finished in 1327 and runs about 1.7 miles, 2.7 kilometers, in a near-perfect circle, matching the shape of the crater. You can walk the entire thing on a covered wooden rampart, which is something you cannot do in most surviving medieval towns. The population is around 20,000. The economy froze in the 17th century after the 30 Years' War, and that accidental standstill is why the town looks the way it does. There was no money to tear anything down. Residents still live in the same half-timbered houses and shop at the same market square. The bell tower, called the Daniel, has been staffed by a watchman for over 500 years. Every night at the top of each hour, the watchman still calls out from the tower, "So Giselle, so, all is well, fellow." Number 6. Motovun on the Istrian Peninsula in Croatia. Motovun sits on top of a limestone hill about 910 feet high, 277 meters above the Mirna River Valley. It has been inhabited since pre-Roman times. The existing walls are Venetian work from roughly 1278 onwards, when Istria came under the control of the Republic of Venice, and they formed two concentric rings. The inner ring dates to the 1200s and 1300s. The outer ring was added in the 1400s. That double ring design was the standard Venetian approach to defending small hill towns. If an enemy broke through the outer ring, they were funneled into a narrow kill zone between the two walls. Today, only about 397 people live inside the walls, in stone houses crammed along a single spiralling street that climbs to a central square. The town is famous for truffles, and the Mirna Valley below has produced some of the largest white truffles ever recorded, including one that weighed nearly 3 pounds, 1.3 kilograms, in 1999. But what matters is the architecture. The walls are built of alternating layers of dressed ashlar stone outside, rubble, fill in the middle, and another course of dressed stone inside. That sandwich structure is what gave medieval walls their shock resistance. A solid wall transmits a shock straight through. A sandwiched wall with a rubble core absorbs and scatters the energy. Modern concrete walls are solid. They crack. Medieval walls flex slightly and hold. Number 7. Provins, France. About an hour and a half east of Paris by train, on the edge of the Champagne region, there is a walled upper town that almost nobody visits. Provins was the site of one of the largest medieval trade fairs in Europe, the Champagne Fair, held twice a year under the protection of the Counts of Champagne from the 1100s through the 1300s. Merchants came from Italy, Flanders, England, and the Levant. Silk from Persia was traded for wool from England, spices from Egypt for furs from the Baltic. At its peak, the fair at Provins was the single most important wholesale market in medieval Europe. The unit of weight we still call the Troy ounce got its name from the nearby town of Troyes, where the same merchants set prices. The Counts built city walls in the 1200s that originally ran about 3.1 miles, 5 kilometres. Roughly 3/4 of a mile, 1.2 kilometres, still stand, and the 12th century octagonal keep called the Tour César dominates the skyline. UNESCO listed the town as a World Heritage Site in 2001. The population is around 11,600. The upper town is where the walls are. The lower town is a normal French town where people buy groceries. That split is important. It means the medieval part of Provins is not a museum. It is a neighbourhood. Under the streets there are more than 2 miles of underground tunnels, carved into the chalk by merchants to store perishable goods at a constant 54 degrees Fahrenheit, 12 degrees Celsius, which was medieval refrigeration. Parts of that network are still open for guided tours. The rest lies sealed under private cellars, still holding whatever the merchants left behind when the fair moved to Bruges in 1320. Number 8. Albarracín in the province of Teruel, Spain. This one does not look like any other town on this list. Albarracín is built into a horseshoe bend of the Guadalquivir River on a vertical pink sandstone cliff. The walls curve up and over the ridge above the houses, with a watchtower called the Torre del Andador, the Walker's Tower, guarding the highest point. The local stone is called Rodino. It contains small flecks of iron, and when the plaster on the walls gets rained on, the iron rusts faster, which is why the entire town glows pink and deep red in the right light. The walls themselves are mostly 13th century, built when Albarracín was briefly an independent Christian lordship sandwiched between the kingdoms of Castile, Aragon, and Valencia. For about 200 years, from 1165 to 1285, it was a small independent state ruled by a single family, the Azagra. The walls were built so aggressively on the high ground because they were not just defence. They were a political statement. About 1,075 people live inside or just beside the walls today. The houses are stacked so tightly on the cliff face that upper floors actually overhang the street below, sometimes by 3 to 6 feet, 1 to 2 meters. Builders used a cantilever technique called jettying, where the upper floor sits on a horizontal beam that projects out beyond the wall below. It gave them more living space on a cliff where every square foot was fought over, and it protected the lower walls from rain. The beams are usually juniper, which is local to the Sierra de Albarracín and resists rot for centuries. You can still see that overhanging carpentry from the 1300s today, with the same joiner's marks scratched into the beams. Number 9. Ston in Croatia. We end with the most impressive piece of wall engineering still inhabited in Europe. The walls of Ston are the longest complete fortress system on the continent, and the second longest in the world, behind only the Great Wall of China. They were started in 1358 by the Republic of Ragusa, which is the medieval name for Dubrovnik, and finished in the 1400s. The full system originally ran about 4.3 miles, 7 kilometers, with 40 towers and 5 fortresses connecting the town of Ston on one side of the Pelješac Peninsula with the town of Mali Ston on the other. 20 of those towers still stand. Roughly 2.3 miles, 3.7 kilometers of wall are still intact and walkable. The wall was not built for normal defence. It was built to protect the salt pans. The stone salt works have been operating continuously since at least Roman times. Seawater is flooded into a stepped grid of 58 shallow clay basins. The sun and wind evaporate the water, and crystallized salt is raked out by hand using wooden tools. Output is around 500 tons per year, using the same method as 1,000 years ago. In the Middle Ages, stone salt was worth more than gold by weight, and tax revenue from this peninsula was one of the largest sources of income for the Republic of Ragusa. The wall was built to protect the money. Its height between 16 and 33 feet depending on terrain, 5 to 10 meters, was calculated to match the range of 14th century crossbows. Not over-engineered, exactly enough. Inside that wall, about 500 people still live in the town of Ston itself, and another 230 in Mali Ston across the bay. The salt is still being raked. The walls are still standing guard over it. 9 towns, 9 living fortresses. And one thing they all have in common. Paris, Vienna and Florence tore their walls down in the 1800s to make room for boulevards and industry. These 9 were too poor to demolish anything, and that accidental poverty is what preserved them. Poverty saved the stone, but people kept it alive. Which of these 9 towns are you going to visit first? Drop a comment and tell me. And if you want me to do a deep dive on any single one, the siege history of Monteriggioni, the salt trade that built Ston, the crater diamonds of Nördlingen, the Queen's tradition of Óbidos, tell me which one you want to see first and I will make it happen.